They said influence is just pressure with a smile. I learned that the hard way, staring at the ceiling fan in my one bedroom, counting the slow circles as if they could rewind time. The room smelled like coffee and rain. My phone buzzed with a message I didn't want to open. I knew what it would say. Another polite rejection. Another door closed by someone who swore they were rooting for me. I used to think people liked me. Then I learned they liked the version of me that didn't threaten their comfort. The version that kept her head down, did the extra work, made other people look good. The version of me that said no problem while bleeding out in small, quiet ways. Tonight, the bleeding stopped. I stood up, shut off the fan, and wrote a sentence that felt like a vow. I will never be the background again. It didn't sound like rage. It sounded like a deadline. Outside, the city hissed, tires on wet pavement, a siren somewhere close, then distant. I pulled my coat on and walked without a destination, like the sidewalks might confess something they'd been keeping from me. Neon slid over puddles. A bar TV flashed highlights of a game I didn't care about. My life had felt like that for a while. Someone else's victory played on a loop while I pretended to cheer. I wasn't lost. I was finally listening. At the corner deli, the guy behind the counter knew my name and my order and nothing else about me. "Long day, Ava?" he asked, hand already on the coffee pot. "Long enough?" I said. He poured. I watched steam rise like a ghost that refused to leave. "Big plans tonight," he said. "Bigger than they used to be." He laughed like I was making a joke. Maybe I was. Maybe I had been my own punchline for years, but the thing about jokes is they're just truth in costume. I carried the coffee outside and let it burn my tongue. Pain brings you back to your body. It reminds you what you can still feel. Across the street, a billboard for a luxury high-rise promised a life with views that change everything. It made me think of the office I used to work in, the one with glass walls and a view of the river that I never had time to look at, the one where I stayed late, fixed the pitch decks, and fed lines to a man who told me I wasn't client-facing. He said it like an apology. He meant it like a leash. When the promotion he promised went to someone with a firmer handshake and a softer spine, I told myself it was fine. I told myself next time. Then the next time came and went. Then the economy dipped. Then budgets got reshaped. Then my job disappeared, not with a bang, but with a calendar invite and a security guard watching while I slid framed photos into a cardboard box. The man who hugged me in the lobby was the same man who used my ideas word for word in the meeting where they decided I was redundant. The word stuck like a seed in my throat. Redundant. I swallowed it, but it grew. You can't starve a story that knows your name. At home, I wrote a list of every person who had turned my silence into their salary, not to hurt them, to learn from them. Influence had always moved like a shadow in my life, cast by other people. I wanted to understand how to hold the light. I studied the way they talked, the way they never rushed a sentence, the way they looked at you like a doctor reading a chart, eyes flicking between your face and the space around it, scanning for weakness, opportunity, the angle that would make you say yes and thank you for the privilege. I made a second list. Not of enemies, of leverage. Who followed whom, who owed whom, who had a reputation that looked strong but balanced on a single lie. I mapped it out with index cards and string like a crime show because a pattern looks different when you stand up and make it bigger than a notebook. Power is a language. It's not always loud, it's fluent in favors. It remembers birthdays and burns notes. It smiles more than it laughs. I wasn't trying to become a villain. I was trying to stop being a victim. The first move wasn't dramatic. I reached out to someone who had sat 2 rows behind me in college, the girl who never missed a networking event and always photographed her notes. Her name was Erin, and she had built a small empire while I was writing strategy memos for other people to read out loud. I asked her for 15 minutes. She gave me 5. I used 4.5. Strategic influence, I said. Not manipulation, direction, gravity. I want to design it instead of orbiting it. She smirked in a way that told me the phrase was good. And on who? She asked. On the rooms that decide things, on the narrative that repeats itself when I'm not in the room. Sounds like revenge. Sounds like reclamation. Her smirk softened. What do you need from me? A mirror, I said, and what do I say that lands? What slides off? What makes you forget I was in the room? She tilted her head. You apologize before you have to. You ask for permission with your eyes. You lower your voice at the end of sentences, like a plane that doesn't believe in its own runway. It stung. Good. I was buying pain now. I was investing in it. What else? I said. You're smart, she said, like an accusation. But you let smart be quiet. Make it loud, not in volume, in intent. Choose your verbs like you choose allies. I wrote that down. Choose verbs like allies. Say less, she added, but say what you can't be misquoted on. When the 5 minutes were up, she stood. One more thing, she said. You can't fight a narrative with a fact. You fight it with a better story. I don't have one yet. Then borrow one, she said, until yours is undeniable. I walked out lighter, not because she'd solved anything, because she'd given me permission to stop asking for permission. The next week, I volunteered at a nonprofit that worked with foster youth. Not because I wanted a halo, because I needed proximity to reality. Influence built in boardrooms gets brittle. Influence built in rooms with folding chairs and slow Wi-Fi grows teeth. I met a 17-year-old named Malik who had eyes like a locked door. He didn't trust me, and he was right not to. That made me trust him. He told me about the way people looked at him in stores, the way teachers told him to use his inside voice when he was already whispering, the way social workers changed every few months, always starting over, always asking him to repeat the worst parts of his life so they could re-enter them into a system that kept forgetting. I don't want their stories, he said. I want mine. It lodged under my ribs. I had been living inside someone else's story for years. I had been the reliable side character who arrived with a solution and left before the credits. No more. I started a small series online, no polished brand, no aspirational aesthetic, just a camera and a promise. Stories about hope, strength, dreams, and the little miracles that nobody monetizes. I posted every day. I learned to edit in quiet hours. I studied retention curves like they were treasure maps. I watched the places people rewound, the seconds that made them breathe different. The first video didn't do much. The second one did a little. The third one hit like a match in dry brush. By the end of the week, a woman in Nebraska had emailed me to say the video kept her from drinking. A teenager in Ohio said he played it for his mom in the car. A man in Florida said he cried at a red light and felt ashamed until he didn't. I didn't need millions. I needed 1,000 people who would rather feel than pretend. My old boss texted me a thumbs up emoji and a proud of you. I didn't reply. Not because I was petty, because my energy had new work to do. Aaron invited me to a salon night, one of those small gatherings where the guest list glowed with names that usually wore lanyards. We met in a penthouse that did, in fact, have views that might change a few things. The host, a man whose net worth had a Wikipedia page, asked me what I did. I designed gravity, I said. I didn't smile when I said it. He paused. The room waited. He liked the sentence, but wanted proof. People are desperate for someone to hold the line, I said. Not a leader who needs a stage. A steady voice that builds one small truth on another until it becomes a place you can stand. He looked at me longer. And what do you need? He asked. Not funding, I said, though I could have used it. Access. To what? The rooms where truth reports in late, I said. The places where decisions are made on fear and framed as prudence. He laughed. Not unkindly. We all do that, he said. Then let's all stop, I said, and finally I smiled. He introduced me to a woman who ran a foundation that funded media experiments. She talked about narrative ecosystems and the velocity of trust. I listened, then repeated back the one sentence I wanted to hold. You can't fight a narrative with a fact. She nodded. You fight it with a better story, she said. We were in agreement. She asked for a deck. I told her I'd send a film. I stayed up 3 nights cutting together a pilot, true stories told like thrillers, not because pain is entertainment, but because attention is a scarce resource, and I had to earn it. The music swelled, then stopped. The frames lingered. The voiceover knifed through lies and left the truth bleeding but not dead. When I sent it, I didn't ask what she thought. I told her what I intended to do next and why it would work. I told her the cost of not doing it, measured not in dollars but in kids like Malik who would be asked to repeat their worst memories for the rest of their lives. She called within the hour. "We'll back you," she said, "but understand, we don't do rescue missions. We do partnerships." "Good," I said. "I'm not drowning. I'm building a dock." A month later, the first episode went live. It didn't trend. It quietly burrowed. The comments felt like confessions. The messages felt like people coming out from under furniture after a storm. A journalist reached out. She asked why now. I said because waiting taught me more than winning ever did. I said because revenge is just justice with a broken heart, and I needed something better than that. I needed repair. But the truth is, revenge still breathed under my skin like a second pulse. I didn't want to destroy anyone. I wanted them to feel the emptiness they handed me and call it by its name. One night I passed the old office building. The lobby lights were on. A janitor mopped the marble like nothing had ever happened there except footprints. I stood outside and watched my own reflection in the glass layered over the place that used to use me. My reflection looked back like she had questions. I took out my phone and recorded a message I didn't plan to post. "If you ever loved the soft parts of yourself and felt punished for it, I see you, I said. If you were ever told to be client-facing while your work faced every fire, I see you. If you ever lost a job and thought you lost your name with it, I see you. You didn't. You never could." A shadow moved in the lobby. A security guard lifted his head. I put my phone away and kept walking. I was not the background anymore. I was the narrator. The second season was going to be sharper. I wanted to profile the rooms that called themselves meritocratic while running on favors and fear. I wanted to trace how power dressed itself up as caution. I wanted to tell stories that made people feel brave enough to make one small, defiant choice in their own lives. But there was a cost to influence. It asked for more of me than the world ever did when I was quiet. It asked for honesty that burned. It asked for humility that didn't humiliate. It asked me to hold the line even when I wanted to lay it down and sleep. One morning, Malik sent a video of himself reading a poem he'd written. His voice shook, then steadied. He didn't ask for notes. He wasn't asking permission. "You did that," Aaron texted. "No," I replied. "He did." "You made it possible." Maybe. Or maybe all I did was stop standing in the doorway of my own life. It would be easy to end here. To say I finally made peace, that the ghosts packed their bags and left a note. But the truth is darker and more useful. The ghosts stayed. They just changed their jobs. They became consultants. They told me when my pride was loud and my listening was quiet. They asked me who I hadn't forgiven yet and why. They asked me if I could build something that didn't require an enemy. I am trying. The city kept hissing. The rain returned and the neon did its trick. Somewhere a siren started and didn't know how to stop. I unlocked my door and stepped inside a room that smelled like coffee and effort. I turned on the fan. It spun the way it always had. The difference was me. They said influence is pressure with a smile. I say it is the art of choosing where the pressure belongs. It belongs on the lies. It belongs on the stories that make us small. It belongs on the shoulders of anyone who profits from our silence. Tonight it belonged on me, pressing me toward the work, toward the people, toward the room I used to think I needed permission to enter. No more. The morning the email leaked, the sky over the river looked like bruised glass. News traveled faster than reason. A link spun through group chats with my name in the subject line and a lie stapled to it. Not a big lie, a small one. The kind people are eager to believe because it flatters their fear. that I was weaponizing trauma for clout. I didn't open the link. I watched the dots on my phone blink, friends typing, then deleting. I could feel their fingers hovering over the choice to ask me if it was true, or to stay silent and wait to see where the crowd went. I understood. A crowd can feel like a weather report. No one blames the rain for the flood. I put the phone face down and made coffee the way my father used to, patient and unhurried, as if time had a soft spot for ritual. Steam rose. The kettle sang. The smell pulled something old out of me and set it on the counter where I could look at it. I poured. I sipped. I let the heat remind me that being hurt and being harmed aren't the same thing. When I finally opened my laptop, the first message I read was from Erin. No emoji. No apologies. They're afraid, she wrote. That means you moved something. Who's they? I typed. The ones who mistake comfort for character. I smiled because I needed to. Then I stopped because I didn't. I knew the leak didn't come from nowhere. It was planted. Precision outrage. The sentence structure of the posts matched the cadence of a man who always thought better of me when the room was full of his friends. My former boss had a habit of turning adjectives into shields. Ambitious, passionate, relentless. Praise that sounds warm until his partner stepped out, and he asked me to soften the edges for the deck. His way of using the truth as a napkin. I could have called him. I could have sent a cease and desist. I could have told myself that an honest fight is still a fight, but influence isn't a game played at your opponent's level. It's played at your audience's. I recorded a video. No edits, no music, no cuts. I don't monetize pain, I said, eyes straight into the lens. I refuse to turn people into content. I tell stories to build rooms where the truth sits at the head of the table. If that offends you, I hope it also challenges you. If that scares you, ask why power prefers silence. I posted it. I closed my laptop. I cleaned the counter. I walked 4 blocks to the park where the benches held the shape of grieving families at dusk. I breathed until the winter air made my ribs sting. When I checked my phone again, the comments had split down 2 familiar roads. People who recognized the smear and people who performed concern. Concern is a velvet knife. It cuts clean while pretending to hug. I didn't reply to any of them. My job wasn't to wrestle anyone into seeing me. My job was to keep telling the truth until the truth didn't need my name attached to it anymore. At noon, the foundation called. The woman who had said velocity of trust had a new phrase in her mouth, brand risk. I understand, I said, even though my hands shook. But if your brand can't risk the truth, then your brand is just expensive fear. She exhaled into the pause. We're not pulling support, she said, choosing each word like a careful step on black ice. We're asking for guardrails. Name them, I said. No anonymous sources, no stories without 2 corroborations, no subjects under 18 without a guardian present. Done, I said. I had already been doing all of that. The rules didn't shackle me. They fenced in the cowards pretending to be brave. After the call, I sat at my desk and stared at the string map on the wall. Names, arrows, dates. Not revenge, context. If I was going to survive influence at scale, I needed to understand the weather patterns of power. Who seeded storms? Who sold umbrellas? Who called the flood an act of God? And who built the levees in the dark? A knock at the door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the peephole and saw a teenager shifting from foot to foot, hood up, nervous. When I opened the door, Malik stood there like he was ready to run. What's wrong? I asked. He held up his phone. The leak had found him. The lie had legs. You told me not to read comments, he said, so I didn't. But this came to me, and I wanted to ask, are you okay? I felt the proud, fragile thing in my chest that grows when someone you respect chooses to be brave for you. I'm okay, I said. I'm not fine, but I'm okay. He nodded slow, like he didn't want to knock over the moment. You still coming to workshop tonight? He asked. Of course. He glanced past me at the map. "You're really doing it," he said. "I'm trying." "Good," he said. And then he did something I didn't expect. He took out a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "I wrote this when I couldn't sleep," he said. "It's not for the show. It's for you." I started to say he didn't have to, but he shook his head and put it in my hand. The paper was warm. I waited until he was halfway down the hall to unfold it. It was a poem. Short lines. Strong spine. The last stanza stopped me like a hand on my shoulder. "Keep your voice where your mouth is. Don't let them call your seat a favor. Don't let them rename your name." I pressed the paper to my chest for a second because sometimes you have to stage your own ritual. Then I grabbed my bag and left for the workshop. The community center smelled like gym floors and old hope. Folding chairs circled a table scuffed by the years. We started with small talk because big talk needs a landing strip. I watched the kids, not really, apprentices to their own hearts, trade jokes and snacks. Trust looks like nothing from a distance. Up close, it looks like water. We didn't speak about the leak. They didn't need to babysit my reputation. They were there to build their own. We read pages. We cut lines that were beautiful but untrue. We added lines that were ugly but honest. We laughed at the right parts and pretended not to cry at the others. When it ended, a girl named Zoe, who wore her hair like a manifesto, lingered. "How do you not hate them?" she asked, voice low, as we stacked chairs. "Who?" I said, even though I knew. "The ones who lied." I ran a thumb along a dent in the chair's metal. "I do," I said. "Some days. Hate is a shape that fits the hand, but it's heavy and my work needs light hands." That sounds like something a therapist would say. It is, and it's true. "I want to make something that makes them feel what I felt," she said like a confession. "Then start by naming exactly what you felt," I said. "It's not poetic, precise." "Small," she said after a beat. "Like a word in a giant's mouth." I nodded. "Build from that. Make the giant choke on it." She smiled. I could see the outline of the future artist she would be. Someone who turned glass into mirrors and mirrors into windows. On my way home, a stranger DM'd me a screenshot of a group chat. My old boss was in it, making jokes that dressed like advice. He wrote that I was spiraling into advocacy like a missed promotion owes her an audience. He called me earnest. He used it like a slur. I watched the clock at the top of the screen. The message was 5 minutes old. I could still taste the fresh battery of it. I wanted to go full flame. I wanted to quote the texts he sent late at night, the ones that said I had a beautiful mind and could make magic if I learned to be a bit more political. I wanted to post photos of his red line edits where he turned my sharp "we will" into a timid "we should consider." But Revenge is a movie that ends with credits. Influence is a series that runs for seasons. I wrote an email instead, not to him, to the board member who always wore navy suits and listened like a court recorder. I told him I had evidence of internal disparagement. I told him I wouldn't be pursuing legal action if the company issued a public statement about best practices in storytelling ethics acknowledging the harm of weaponized concern. I didn't attach the evidence. I told him I would if asked. I copied my attorney. I wrote in verbs that didn't wiggle. I sent it. The reply came at 2 a.m. "We take this seriously," it said. "Let's discuss." I slept for 3 hours and dreamed of staircases with missing steps. The next day, I met the foundation again. In a conference room with glass walls and fake plants that looked better than most real ones. The woman with the careful voice had backup now. A man who introduced himself as the brand steward. He wore self-assurance like cologne. He thanked me for my candor, which is what people say when they're about to ask you to be quiet. "We believe in your mission," he said, "but we also need to protect the institution." "Then teach the institution to stand in the rain," I said. He blinked, as if weather were a metaphor he hadn't scheduled for. "We're proposing a review committee for episodes," he said. "Not to censor, to ensure rigor." "Who's on it?" I asked. He listed names that sounded like legacy. I recognized two. Both had published pieces that cut truth into bite-sized platitudes for donors with short attention spans. "No," I said. "No?" He echoed, confused, as if I'd declined oxygen. I'll submit scripts to fact-checkers with no stake in our success in Nummerine, I said. I won't submit to people who profit from the soft lie. The room cooled by 10 degrees. I kept going. I know what it looks like when you dress fear in the clothes of process. It looks like delay. It looks like the story rotting while the committee searches for a way to accuse the apple of being too red. The woman looked at me with something like respect, trying to look like restraint. "What do you propose, Ward?" she asked. "Transparency," I said. "We publish our standards, we publish our corrections, we publish our sources where possible. We don't publish control. Silence can be violence. It can also be a vote." "Okay," she said finally, "pilot it your way." We shook hands. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. It didn't need to. On my way home, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't know. I ignored it. It buzzed again. I answered. "You don't know me," the voice said, but you know my boss." I didn't ask how she got my number. She was calling from a stairwell. I could hear the echo. She sounded like most people sound when their conscience wins around, terrified and clear. "He's the one who seeded the story about you," she said. "He's done it before. He's doing it to others. He'll do it to me if he finds out I called." I sat on a curb outside a bakery that had closed early, flower ghosts on the window. "Why are you telling me?" I asked. "Because I watched him turn your ideas into his, and I watched you leave without setting anything on fire. I thought that meant you were soft. Then I watched what you built. I was wrong." "What do you need?" I asked. "Out," she said, "and a place to tell the truth without ending my career." I inhaled until my chest ached. "I can't promise protection," I said. "I can promise process, documentation, an attorney who works quietly, a story that keeps your face out of the light until you're ready." "Okay," she said. "I'll send you the files." We ended the call. I stared at the closed sign and felt the shape of my old life press against the glass from the other side. That night I started building a protocol for whistleblowers, secure uploads, second devices, dead man switches that sent notes to lawyers if the sender went dark. I wasn't interested in drama. I was interested in safety. Influence without safety is a carnival trick. It dazzles. It disappears. It never changes anything. Files arrived, emails, Slack screenshots, meeting notes with margins full of insults that posed as banter. It was worse than I expected and exactly what I knew. There's no joy in being right about rot. I sat under the lamplight and read until dawn. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. I felt like a medic who knew the triage line was going to outlive the sunrise. In the morning, I called the board member back. "I have documentation," I said. "Your choice is not between protecting your brand and protecting the truth. It's between fixing this and pretending you didn't see it." "What do you want?" he asked, voice low. "Public accountability," I said. "And a fund for victims of reputational smears by your executives. Anonymous if they prefer, real apologies, real money." "You're asking a lot." "I'm asking the right amount." He didn't commit. He also didn't hang up. That was enough, for now. I turned to the season I was building. The new episode centered on a nurse who reported shortages and got punished with shift changes that broke her life. Not a headline story, a human one. The kind that makes people see the scaffolding behind their own everyday pain. We filmed in quiet rooms. We cut around faces when we had to. We let hands hold the frame longer than usual because hands confess what mouths can't. I wrote the voiceover like a prayer for people who don't pray. The night before we published, I sat alone and asked myself the question I should have asked at the start of every fight. What if I lose? What if the smear sticks? What if the funding dries? What if the crowd decides the weather and the flood comes? I wrote the answer on a sticky note and put it on my screen. Then I keep telling the truth at a smaller table, and I make that table matter. When the episode went live, it didn't explode. It entered the world like a careful guest. It knocked. It removed its shoes. Then it sat next to someone who needed company and refused to leave when the room got cold. The comments came from nurses who knew the nurse, from daughters who forgave their mothers for coming home too tired to speak, from men who didn't understand until the voiceover paused on a breath and let them feel the urgency under the quiet. The foundation sent me a one-line email. "This is the work." I pinned it, not for pride, for persistence. 2 days later, the company posted a statement about fostering ethical narratives and supporting storytellers with integrity. It read like a pillow, soft, suffocating. It didn't name me. It didn't have to. The board member called after. "We're starting a fund," he said. "We'll announce it next week." "Good," I said. "Announce the mechanism, not the marketing." He was quiet. "You won," he said, a little surprised. "I didn't win," I said. "We moved the floor an inch." That night, I walked past the river. The water carried lights like rumors. I thought about revenge, the way it used to call me in the shower, in the line at the pharmacy, at the red light where men cried. It still called, but softer now. Like a song from a room I used to live in. I turned my phone on airplane mode. I watched the water. A stranger in a puffy jacket asked me to take a photo of him and his wife. She tucked her hands into his coat. He leaned into her like the world was a wind you could lean against. I took the picture and made sure the skyline was in it because evidence matters when the moment ends. On my way home, I saw my billboard. Not mine. I didn't buy it. Someone had painted over the luxury high-rise ad with a message that made me stop. Views that change everything start inside? I didn't know if it was art or vandalism. I took a photo anyway. Some truths are illegal only to the people who fear them. Near midnight, my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number, a video. I pressed play. My old boss, drunk at a rooftop party, laughing into the wind, calling me the Persistence Project, as if my stamina were a flaw. The person filming asked, "You worried she might come for you?" He scoffed. "She doesn't have the stomach." I watched it twice. I didn't feel rage. I felt a clarity so clean it almost hurt. He wasn't my villain. He was a symptom. He was a man who learned that power loves plausible deniability and that charm turns accountability into a suggestion. I closed the video. I opened my notes. I wrote, "Build systems that don't rely on men like him being better. Build systems that make it impossible for them to be worse." A week later, the whistleblower protocol saved someone from a smear that would have ended her career. She sent me a DM with 3 words. "I can breathe." It felt like a paycheck that money can't print. Aaron and I met at a diner that still served coffee in thick chipped mugs and believed in pie like religion. We talked about the next season, about building community editors, about training workshops so the kids could tell their own stories without waiting for my microphone. "You're building yourself out of the center," she said. "That's the point, Yara," I said. "You sure?" "I didn't leave the background to become the spotlight. I left it to become a light switch." She laughed. "Put that on a shirt." "Put it into practice," I said. On the way out, I checked my email. One from the board member, subject line, "EASA, Accountability Steps." One from the foundation, "Renewal." One from a school in Nebraska, "Can you talk to our seniors?" I said yes to the students. I said, "Send the draft to the board." I said 1 year with an option tied to transparency metrics to the foundation. When I got home, the ceiling fan turned over the old air and made it new. I lay on the floor and stared up. The first night I wrote my vow felt close, like a shadow over my shoulder that wasn't threatening anymore. It was protective. It wasn't saying, "Remember the hurt." It was saying, "Remember the choice." My phone buzzed with a final message before sleep, from Zoe. A link to her first published piece in the school paper. The headline felt like a promise kept, "Stop calling courage a crisis." I read it. I smiled. I let myself be proud, not of me, but of the chain reaction. I turned off the light. The apartment went quiet in a way that made room for good ghosts, the kind that hold you accountable, the kind that wait by the door, shoes on, ready to walk with you, into rooms that need building. Sometimes the work is a storm, sometimes it's a steady hand on a trembling glass. Tonight it was a hand. Tomorrow maybe a storm. Either way, I would be there. Not because revenge asked me to, because hope did. Because strength is softer than we think and tougher than we fear. Because dreams don't show up with a microphone, they show up with a hammer and ask where to start. I told them, start where the lie is loudest. I told them, start with me. I slept. The city kept its secrets. The morning would come with new messages, new weather, new small miracles nobody monetizes. I would make coffee. I would listen. I would choose verbs like allies. I would place pressure where it belonged. And when the next storm arrived, and it would, I'd open the door, step into it, and tell a better story until the wind changed its mind. The day the city lost power, my apartment went dark with everyone else's. The fan stilled. The fridge sighed. Silence pooled in corners like rainwater. Outside, sirens tangled with laughter, the kind that's half thrill, half denial. The blackout made the skyline honest. No glitter, just angles and shadow. I lit a candle and watched its small, stubborn heart. Flame teaches scale. It says, start here. It says, steady wins when chaos arrives hungry. My phone buzzed once, then died. I found the old tape recorder in a drawer, the one I used before algorithms learned to measure attention by the inch. I clicked it on. The red eye glowed, a single star in a private sky. If you can hear this, IB, I said, voice low, it means the grid remembered its mortal. Tonight we tell stories like our grandparents did. No feeds, no edits, just breathing in the truth. The building's hallway filled with voices. Doors opened, candles multiplied. We met ourselves in stairwells, carrying flashlights like promises. I walked down with a recorder and a notebook and a pack of matches. People were kinder in the dark. They made space with their bodies instead of their calendars. On the sidewalk, the deli guy set out a metal table and a cooler full of melting ice. He handed out bottled water and jokes borrowed from better nights. Across the street, a violinist tried not to be obvious about the way he smiled when a child spun to his music and forgot to be afraid. In the pooled glow, I saw her. The woman from the stairwell who'd called me about her boss. She didn't wave. She walked straight to me with the gravity of a courier. He told me to meet him tonight, she said, voice tight. He wanted me to bring my laptop. He said they were going to clean house and he needed help. She glanced at the dark sky. Then the lights went out. What did you do? I asked. I told him I'd be there, she said. Then I called you. Good, I said. Tell me everything. We sat on the curb, two silhouettes holding a fuse. She laid it out, how the smear had been seeded, which burner phones were used, where the messages were drafted before migrating to company Slack with plausible deniability. She had timestamps and file names and a whisper of shame that didn't belong to her. You can still walk, I said, if you want. Walk where? She asked. Into another building where the light is pretty and the rooms are the same? Into yourself, I said, and into the policy we're going to write so this doesn't hinge on your bravery. She made a sound like a laugh that forgot how to finish. You really think policy stops men like him? No, I said, but it slows them down long enough for the truth to catch up. The violin paused. A generator coughed awake on the next block, a stubborn engine narrating the neighborhood's refusal to quit. The candle inside me held. When the lights returned at 2 a.m., the city cheered like a stadium after the winning shot. I didn't. I liked the dark better. It made the signal easier to hear. In the morning, we put names to the protocol and gave it bones. Secure intake, verified chain of custody for digital evidence, a sitting panel of 3, a media lawyer, a trauma-informed investigator, and a community advocate with no stake in our budget. No heroes, no martyrs, just process you could print and hand to someone whose hands were shaking. We published it. We invited scrutiny. We kept receipts. Then we set our aim on the next story, the one with the nurse had opened a door. This one would be a map. We called it The Line, because that's what systems draw when they pretend fairness, a clean edge across messy lives. It started with a public housing complex that had waited 11 years for repairs nobody could explain. Mold climbed walls like ivy with a grudge. Kids wheezed in their sleep. The city inspected and found no conditions that meet emergency criteria. The photos said otherwise. The mothers said otherwise. The air said otherwise. We filmed with consent and care. No faces unless they wanted light. No questions designed to make grief perform. I held the recorder again even though the grid was steady. I wanted the click and hum of analog. It made me listen harder. At the tenant meeting, a woman named Carmen stood up and spoke like a gavel. "You give us forms," she said. "We give you time. Then your time runs out and our walls grow teeth." She lifted a photo of her son's inhaler. "This is how my boy sleeps." We followed the paper trail into a narrow office stacked with files like leaning towers. The clerk wore a cardigan that tried to be friendly. "We're backlogged," she said. "We're underfunded. We're trying." "I don't doubt it," I said. "But the backlog has fingerprints." She cut her eyes to the door, then back. "Some requests get a paperclip," she said. "Some get a staple." "What's the difference?" "Paperclips fall off." "Who gets staples?" I asked. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The board member in my phone did. I called him outside under a brittle winter sun that made the buildings look freshly scrubbed and unforgiven. "You've got a contractor feeding the councilman," I said. "Repairs go where the votes need to land. The rest get paperclips." He went quiet the way men go quiet when their illusions are being unbuttoned. "Can you prove it?" "Yes," I said. "But your proof shouldn't be my job. I'll start a review." "You'll start a shift," I said. "Change the procurement rules, rotate inspection routes, publish a dashboard the public can read without an interpreter." "You ask like you've been in rooms like mine, Kifoi," he said. "I have," I said. "They usually had better coffee." We released the episode on a Thursday late afternoon, the hour when the internet pretends to take a breath. It landed like a dropped wrench. Not loud enough to cause a stampede, heavy enough to dent the floor. The comments were not a flood, they were a steady rain. Former inspectors, tenants in other neighborhoods, a contractor's assistant who said he'd seen the staples. The foundation emailed 3 words again: "We stand by." Not me. The work. That distinction mattered. It kept me from confusing my pulse with our purpose. That weekend, a council aide asked to meet off the record. We declined. We offered on the record in a room with a camera and our panel present. He said he'd get back to us. He didn't. I aired his silence next to Carmen's voice. The contrast told a better truth than any soundbite. The smear campaign tried to rise again like mold after a rain. This time it found no oxygen. The whistleblower's files made an appearance in a court motion I hadn't filed and didn't need to. A different woman did. In a different city, with a different boss. Systems rhymed. We were writing counter lyrics. Erin watched me work and said I looked like a weather map. "You're tracking fronts," she said. "High pressure, low pressure, where the air will break." "Influence is a barometer," I said. "You don't make the storm. You warn the coast." "What about revenge?" she asked, gentle, like checking a scar for tenderness. "It wants to be fed," I said. "I'm on a different diet." She slid a folder across my table. "A pitch," she said, "from a brand that wants to sponsor the series." I opened it. Clean lines, warm colors, words that tested well in focus groups. They offered money with a mirror on the back of it. If I took it, I'd have to check my reflection every time I spoke. "No," I said before the numbers could seduce me. "Good," she said. "I already told them you were expensive." "I am," I said. "My price is the truth." She grinned. "Put that on a mug." "Only if it chips." Behind the work, the personal didn't stop. My father had a scare. An overnight in the hospital, monitors beeping like shy birds. I sat by his bed and listened to the machine count the seconds between beats. He woke and smiled with his eyes. "Kid," he whispered, "remember, you are not your output." "I know," I said. "Say it," he insisted. "I am not my output." "Good," he said. "Now get me a real coffee. This hospital brew insults my memory." I laughed and cried at the same time. He squeezed my hand, then fell back into a medicated sleep that looked a lot like surrender and wasn't. I walked to the cafeteria and recorded a note to myself on the old tape machine. Rest is resistance, I said, so is joy. So is saying no to the thing that would make the budget glow and the soul dim. When he stabilized, I went home and slept for 13 hours and dreamed in clean lines like pages being trimmed. I woke with a sentence in my mouth: build a school that teaches what I had to unlearn. We called it the Line School. Free weekend workshops for storytellers who live below the algorithm's radar. No jargon, no gatekeeping, classes on ethics and framing, and how to sit in a silence without stuffing it with your ego. Carman taught a section on saying it plain. Malik taught reading your own voice out loud until it stops sounding like a stranger. Zoe taught writing toward the room you wish existed. We didn't film those first classes. We let them be small and awkward and perfect. Sometimes the best influence is private. It's a seed refusing to explain itself to winter. On a rain-soaked Sunday, a man I didn't know came to the door of the community center with his hat in his hands. He said his sister had been fired for reporting a safety issue at a warehouse. He said the company gave her a check that looked good until you did the math. He said he wasn't sure what he wanted, but he knew he didn't want to feel this useless anymore. Sit, I said. Tell it from the beginning. He did. We didn't coach him. We didn't decorate. We asked the kind of questions that feel like permission. When he left, he hugged the air next to me and said thank you like a prayer he wasn't used to. We turned his story into a short piece that followed a thread through the supply chain and found the knot tying profit to quiet. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't viral. It made 3 local lawmakers call the warehouse within a day. I measured success by those phone calls, not by hearts. My old boss tried a new tactic. He sent a messenger with compliments so polished they left a residue. He suggested a reconciliation. He offered a panel appearance, a public handshake, a photograph you could print on a brochure. I sent the messenger back with a sentence that would look bad on a mug and perfect on a boundary. I don't reconcile with rot. The brand steward reached out again with better manners. He had learned our language. He said rigor like he meant it. He said autonomy without wincing. He said no oversight committees. Then paused as if expecting applause. What changed? I asked. You did? He said. Or rather the weather did around you. It wasn't me, I said. It was the work. He nodded. Same result. Different story, I said. He asked to attend a line school class. We said yes. He sat in the back and didn't talk. He listened to a girl explain how she used to lower her voice at the end of sentences and how one day she stopped, and how her teacher said she sounded aggressive, and how the room clapped when she said, I prefer accurate. He watched a boy read a paragraph about watching his mother clean offices at night. He cried and tried to hide it. He failed. Good. After class, he shook my hand and didn't pitch a thing. He only said, I remembered why I wanted to do this job in the first place and left before I could ruin the moment by doubting it. The board member sent a draft of the procurement reform. It was sharper than I expected, softer than I wanted. Policy is compromise with a conscience. I marked up the language like a lawyer who loved verbs. Remove should, replace with shall. Remove consider, replace with commit. He sent back a single line. You really hate adverbs. They're escape hatches, I replied. We're here to build doors. Through all of it, the ghosts stayed busy. They whispered at 3 a.m. They took inventory of my pride. They asked who I'd become if the cameras got closer or the money got louder. I answered with the same sentence I'd taped to my screen. If it all goes away, I tell the truth at a smaller table. And I make that table matter. One evening, as the sun laid copper on the river, I found the violinist again. He was playing for no one and everyone. I sat on the curb and listened until the music turned dusk into a room. He finished and nodded at me like we shared a secret. How's your series? He asked. Still fighting for the quiet places, I said. He lifted the violin. That's where the good notes live. I went home and wrote a script that started with a sentence that felt like a vow and a threat. We are done asking liars to officiate the truth. It moved like a heartbeat. It held like a hand. It ended with a door opening and no music because some moments deserve the sound of their own feet. We recorded it in one take. I didn't blink. I didn't rehearse. I just told the story. No heroes, no villains, just a line that moved because ordinary people pushed. We hit publish. Then we went to the park and handed out tea because weather is influence and warmth wins nights that try to turn cold. A week later, the city council passed a motion to audit the repairs backlog and publish the findings. Paper clips started turning into staples. A tenant posted a photo of new drywall and wrote, "My son slept without coughing." I printed the photo and taped it above my desk. I didn't frame it. I don't want glass between me and the reason. Then the call I didn't want came in. The whistleblower had been followed after work. A man asked questions that sounded like statements. She felt the old panic and called me from the bathroom of a bar where the light was unflattering and honest. "Get to the street," I said. "Find a well-lit place. I'm sending someone. Sit with your back against a wall and your eyes on the door. Breathe while I stay on the line." "Why is it always like this?" she asked. "Why is truth a trail through the woods at night?" "Because wolves fear the morning," I said, even though I didn't know. "Hold on." We moved fast. Process clicked. The panel called the lawyer. The advocate texted a safe place 2 blocks away. Aaron drove like a confession and didn't apologize for the speed. I stayed on the phone and told the woman a story about the first time I remembered my name and how it tasted. She laughed. It broke the spell. When she was safe, I shook alone in my kitchen. Influence was romance and war. It wanted your pulse, your sleep, your capacity to sit at a table and enjoy soup without checking the door. I poured water. I drank. I sat on the floor and let the fear pass through me like weather I refused to memorialize. In the hush that followed, I heard my father's voice in my head. "You are not your output." I closed the laptop. I lit a candle. I listened to the fan rotate the room into something like calm. I slept. Morning returned with a small miracle nobody monetizes. A message from a boy who had failed his English class 3 times saying he read his poem on the bus and the driver asked him to send it. A note from Carmen. Inspector came. Brought paint and a list. A DM from the brand steward. "I'm proposing a fund for independent fact-checkers unaffiliated with sponsors. No strings." This is what strategic influence looks like when it's working. It's not a headline. It's a kid breathing better. It's a sentence in a draft turning from maybe to must. It's a city remembering the shape of its own spine. That night I went back to the river. The water kept its appointment with the tide. Lights cut paths on the surface like careful knives. I recorded a message I did plan to post. "You're not alone," I said. "Even when the room wants you to think you are, even when the grid goes down and the wolves rehearse their questions, keep your voice where your mouth is. Keep your name where your hands can hold it. Choose verbs like allies. Place pressure where it belongs." I clicked the recorder off and let the stillness do what stillness does when you trust it. Turn into strength, you. Can't buy, sell, or fake. The wind changed. Or maybe I did. Either way, the city breathed. The lawsuit arrived like a storm in a thin envelope, white paper, black letters, my name in bold. Their demand in legalese that tried to sound polite while baring its teeth. They called it defamation. They called it interference. They called me a threat to business continuity. I didn't pace. I pressed both palms to the counter and let the cool surface hold me together. Fear wanted the driver's seat. I slid it to the back. It could ride. It couldn't steer. Aaron read over my shoulder and whistled low. "They're swinging heavy. They think I'll fold." "You won't." "I can't," I said. "Not if the work means the thing I said it means." We forwarded the papers to the lawyer on our panel. She replied in 15 minutes with a plan that fit on a single page. Respond. Counter. Don't feed the spectacle, do the work. I recorded a message for my people. No rage, no despair, just the facts and a steady voice. Power hates daylight, I said. We're not turning off the lamps. I brewed coffee and waited for the adrenaline to burn clean. My father called and told me a terrible joke. I laughed like it was the first time. He said, "Proud of you, kid." He said, "Don't let them make you answer a question you didn't ask." He said, "Eat." I ate. The news glided in, slow and hard. A quiet investigation had become a loud one. A reporter I trusted had found a paper trail that mirrored ours and widened it. The contractor, the councilman, the Staples. She wanted to go public. She wanted a comment. "Run it," I said. "Cite your sources. We'll cite ours. And when they say it's complicated, say, 'Sure, so let's do the math out loud.'" The smear machine fumbled for a second wind. Anonymous accounts scolded me for performative concern. A think piece suggested my voiceover style tricked emotions. Another called me unhealthy for civic discourse, as if truth were a snack I handed out after bedtime. We kept our cadence, episodes, workshops. The line school syllabus grew. We added a class on how to hold your ground when the ground shakes. People came tired and left standing taller. It wasn't magic. It was practice. Zoe published a follow-up and got a detention for tone. She texted me a photo of the slip. I told her congratulations. I told her to frame it. She sent back a laughing emoji and then the real thing. I didn't cry this time. I held that sentence like a match. Malik had news. A scholarship interview at a school that cared about his poems more than his test scores. He wore a thrifted blazer and a grin that fought its way past old doubt. "I might leave," he said, scared to say the last word. "And that feels like betrayal." "It isn't," I said. "Home is a story, not a zip code. Go make it bigger." At the taping for our next episode, a woman sat with her hands clenched so tight the knuckles looked carved. She was a warehouse supervisor who had warned management about a safety flaw and got reassigned to a shift designed to break her. We paused often. We let silence be the witness it is when you don't muzzle it. When she finished, she asked if she sounded bitter. "You sounded brave," I said. "I don't feel brave." "Nobody does," I said. "That's why it counts." We walked out to the sounds of a city, pretending it didn't remember how often it failed the people who held it together. The wind snapped at the street banners. The sky wore the color of a bruise fading. I looked up and thought about every time I had lowered my voice at the end of a sentence. I thought about what it cost me, what it taught me. I promised myself I wouldn't do that again, even alone. The hearing at City Hall was set for a Tuesday night. The chamber filled with bodies and breath. Mothers with folders, contractors with smirks, aides with legal pads and eyes like calculators. I sat in the second row with Aaron and our panel. The board member placed himself 3 seats away, neutral on purpose, leaning in when it mattered. Names were called, oaths were taken. The councilman blustered. The contractor bragged about efficiency. The auditor spoke in numbers that tried to be neutral and failed. When my turn came, I walked slow. I brought the tape recorder and placed it on the lectern, old red eye, present tense. I didn't perform. I told the story of paper clips and staples. I read from the procurement draft. I used verbs with spine. I gave the room the choice we all get and often refuse, listen or hide. A council member arched an eyebrow and, "Ms. Gray," he said, "are you accusing this body of corruption?" "I'm describing a system that rewards shortcuts," I said. "If the shoe fits, consider why you bought it." A hush rolled. Someone coughed a cough that wasn't about lungs. Another member leaned in, kinder. "And what would you have us do?" "Cut the ribbon on real reform," I said. "No press conference, no adverbs, rotate inspection routes, publish repair timelines in plain language, disclose contractor donations, ban private dinners during bid season, create a tenant liaison with power to escalate without fear, fund independent fact-checkers for public claims not tied to donors, build in the light." The gavel rapped. The hearing moved on. But the room had shifted. You can feel it when a floor lowers a fraction. Your knees know before your mind catches up. After, in the lobby, the contractor cornered me with a smile and a charm that worked best on men who golfed. "You're talented," he said. "You should be telling different stories, better ones. The city needs wins." "I'm telling the story of a city that could win if it stopped losing on purpose," I said. He stepped closer. "You don't know how this works." "I do," I said. "That's why I'm here." He looked past me and saw our panel. He saw the recorder. He saw the camera. He recalculated. He walked away. We filed our response to the lawsuit with receipts glued to each sentence, calm, cold, precise. My attorney said it read like a scalpel. Good. I had no interest in swinging an axe when the cut needed to be clean. The week stretched like a wire. We released the safety episode. The warehouse called the woman to offer her old shift back pending reevaluation. She said no. She wanted a public apology. We told her we'd stand with her while she waited. The brand steward surprised me again. He wired money to the independent fact-checker fund and sent a note. No strings, just standards. I forwarded it to the panel and wrote a single word, progress. Aaron replied with 2, expensive truth. My father had a better day. We took a walk slow enough to teach patience. He told me stories I'd heard before and wanted to hear again. How his first boss tried to pay him less because he smiled too much. How his mother wrote letters in a hand so neat the postman once stopped to compliment it. How he learned to set the table every night no matter what the day did to him. Ritual beats rage, he said, every time. I'm learning. Good, he said. The wolves have sharp teeth. So do spoons when you use them every day. At midnight, the phone rang with a number I knew and didn't. The woman from the stairwell whispered, "They know." Someone had looked at her badge access. Someone had asked questions with smiles too wide. She needed a way out that didn't leave her neck exposed. Tomorrow morning, I said, we go to HR with a lawyer and a letter. We put them on notice. We make retaliation expensive. I'm scared, she said. Me too, I said. Courage is fear that keeps its feet moving. We met at a cafe near the office tower that tried to look harmless with plants in white pots. The lawyer spoke in a tone that made people slow down. We delivered the letter. We watched the HR woman's eyes flip through scripts. We saw the moment she realized this wasn't going to be easy. Good. By lunch, the company had put the boss on leave pending review. They didn't say who. They didn't say what. The message still landed. I felt no joy, only relief drawn tight like a wire. We regrouped and built out the whistleblower policy with another layer, emergency grants for rent, for groceries, for nights when safety means the hotel on the other side of town. The foundation matched the fund by the end of the day. I pinned their email again. This is the work, the reporter called. Her story would run Sunday. She asked for a quote that wasn't a sentence I'd regret. I gave her one. You can't audit your conscience, but you can track your choices. She laughed and said she wished she'd written it. On Saturday, I went to the line school and listened instead of teaching. A man told a story about a brother he hadn't spoken to in a decade. A girl read about the day she stopped shrinking. A woman held up a photograph of a sink that no longer spewed brown water and cried in a way that didn't ask anyone for permission. We held the moment together. We let it pass with honor. At home, I put away the lawsuit documents and cleaned my desk. I sharpened pencils. I folded the poem Malik had given me and tucked it into the notebook I reach for when the dark gets close. I taped another sticky note to the screen. If it goes quiet, listen harder. Sunday dawned gray and honest. The story ran at noon. It landed with a thud that echoed names, dates, donations, quotes from mothers who didn't care if their hair was perfect, copies of emails that moved like smoking guns, phones lit. The contractor's office closed for maintenance. The councilman held a press conference where he said the words "taken aback" and "deeply concerned" and "we will review," with a mouth that had said other things on other days. Someone shouted a question. He didn't hear it on purpose. He left with his jaw set. My inbox filled with messages that didn't know whether to grin or apologize. I ignored most of them. I answered a boy who said, My mom stopped coughing for a whole night. I wrote back, "Tell her we said hi." The company's lawyer filed a motion to speed up the suit. Ours filed a counter pointing out the public interest and the chilling effect and the small matter of the truth. The judge set a date that felt too soon and not soon enough. We prepared. We practiced. We wrote answers that couldn't be twisted without breaking. We drew a line around what I would not say, names that weren't mine to name, details that would make a good clip and a bad precedent. The lawyer nodded. "Protect your people," she said. "We'll protect the rest." Night fell. The ghosts arrived right on time. They took their seats and asked their questions. Who are you if this fails? Who are you if it succeeds? Who are you when nobody's watching? I answered slow. I didn't perform. I told them the small, durable truth. I am the person who sets the table. I am the person who makes coffee. I am the person who keeps telling better stories than the lies. Monday, the city moved like it had slept badly. Sidewalks scowled. Buses breathed smoke. The deli guy handed me a bagel on the house and said, "For courage." I told him it tasted like home. At the firm's offices, glass walls reflected worry back at itself. We sat across from men whose suits were tailored to make them forget they were mortal. They said respectfully before every attempt to make me contradict myself. I didn't. I answered what they asked and nothing else. Aaron squeezed a stress ball under the table and stared at a spot on the wall where the paint bubbled. Our lawyer wrote notes with a pen that looked like a weapon and was. They tried the soft trap. "Wouldn't you agree," one asked, "that in the pursuit of truth, mistakes can be made, and those mistakes can cause harm?" "Yes," I said, "which is why we publish corrections when needed and standards always." They tried the hard trap. "Did you personally instruct a whistleblower to steal confidential documents?" "No," I said. "I instructed people on legal methods for reporting misconduct safely." They tried my patience. "Don't you think your tone inflames?" "I think my tone refuses to anesthetize," I said. "Pain is not a scheduling issue." Our lawyer hid a smile. The men did not. At lunch outside, the air tasted like rain rehearsing. A kid on a skateboard almost clipped my knee and then apologized so earnestly I wanted to give him $20 and a lecture on helmets. Somewhere, a violin played a melody that felt like a hand on your back, steadying without shoving. We went back in and finished the dance. It ended the way it always does, with a promise to be in touch and a handshake that tried to transmit superiority and landed as a sweaty palm. We washed our hands and left. That night, Aaron and I sat on my floor and ate takeout. We spoke about the next episode like there wasn't a storm coming, because that's how work gets done in a weather country. You don't wait for clear skies. You build roofs. "We should do one on apology," she said. "What it is, what it isn't." "Yes," I said. "Real apology starts with naming the harm without using the word if, and ends with action," she said, "plus money." We outlined it on napkins. We wrote examples that would make a few powerful people choke. We smiled. The board member texted, "Audit motion passed, dashboard in progress." He appended a heart by mistake and then immediately sent, "That was not professional." I laughed alone in my kitchen and texted back a thumbs up and a link to a good bakery. Winds need pastry. 2 days before the hearing, I found a note under my door. No signature. "We know where you sleep." I read it twice. My heart spiked. Then it settled. I cataloged the facts. The building had cameras. The hall had neighbors. The note had no fingerprints. I took a photo. I sent it to the lawyer in the panel. I put the paper in a baggie and taped it shut. Fear asked for a monologue. I gave it 2 lines and a seat by the window. It could watch. It could not speak over me. We installed a second lock. The landlord muttered about budgets and then came back with a drill. Aaron slept on my couch. The violinist's music floated up from the street like a reminder that beauty doesn't ask permission to show up in dangerous places. At dawn, I went to the river and watched the light. Try again. It always does. I thought about Malik and his blazer. I thought about Zoe and her framed detention. I thought about Carmen and her son sleeping without coughing. I thought about my father setting the table even on the days he ate alone. The hearing day felt like walking into a cold pool and pretending it's refreshing. The judge looked at me with eyes that had seen thousands of versions of this dance. The opposing counsel wore a tie the color of a warning. Our lawyer whispered, "Breathe," and then stood and spoke my story like it was hers. Because in rooms like this it is, she laid out the standard: public interest, good faith, due diligence, documented care. She framed the work as medicine, not theater. She pointed to the fund, the protocols, the panel, the corrections log, the evidence. The other side tried to pour doubt into the cracks. They waved printouts of tweets I didn't write and comments I didn't moderate. They tried to make the audience my responsibility. The judge raised a hand. "Counsel," she said, "bring me facts, not fog." When it was my turn to speak, I kept it short. "I tell stories so people breathe easier," I said. "If that creates discomfort, good. The discomfort belongs to the lie, not the person the lie harms." The judge nodded once. It felt like weather changing in a room. We recessed, we waited. We sat on a bench that reminded me of high school hallways. Aaron pressed half a granola bar into my hand like communion. I took a bite. It tasted like oats and faith. The ruling came back in language that avoided poetry and did its job. Motion to dismiss. Denied for them, granted for us on key points. Discovery would be narrow, the bar would be high. The judge's order quoted case law about public interest and truth. It also quoted a line from our standards on transparency. The courtroom air shifted. The opposing counsel paged through papers looking for a lifeline that wasn't there. We walked out without celebrating, not because it didn't matter, because the work had to keep mattering more. The contractor resigned to spend time with family. The councilman welcomed the audit. The company reaffirmed its commitment to robust discourse and quietly withdrew their suit 2 weeks later, in light of new information. They didn't apologize. They would, later, or they wouldn't, and we'd go on anyway. The whistleblower took a job with a nonprofit that paid her enough to breathe. She sent a photo of her new desk plant. It was still in the plastic pot. It looked like a brave thing pretending to be ordinary. The brand steward made good on his fund. Independent fact-checkers started sending invoices to a mailbox that wasn't ours. I taped the first receipt to the wall like a medal made of paper. At the line school, we built the apology class. We taught people to start with "I did," not "I'm sorry, if." We asked them to write the cost, then pay it. We asked them to strip the performance and keep the repair. The room felt like a church, not pretending to be one. Maliki called after his interview. He didn't say how it went. He said how he felt. "Like I didn't ask for permission," he said. "Like I brought my own chair." "You did," I said. "Keep doing it." He paused. "Ava?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for not letting me shrink." "I didn't," I said. "You didn't." He laughed. He hung up. I sat with the echo. That night, I passed the luxury billboard again. The graffiti was gone. A new ad promised a life above it all. I took a photo anyway. Evidence of the fight we're always in, gravity versus pretense. At home, I opened the window and let the city in. Sirens sang. Tires hissed. Someone argued softly on the sidewalk. The fan cut the room into spinning pieces and put it back together again. I thought about revenge, my old friend. Now a quiet house guest who paid rent by taking out the trash. It still visited. It still suggested speeches. It still wanted the last word. I let it talk until it bored me. Then I put my hand on the work and felt it pulse. I wrote the next script. It started with a small story about a kid's backpack zipper. It ended with a budget line that nobody had questioned for 10 years. In the middle, it held 100 breath-sized truths that had nothing to sell and everything to save. I recorded it in one take. No music, no softening. The room didn't need decoration. It needed nerve. We hit publish. We went for a walk. We bought soup. We taught class. We returned calls. We slept. Morning brought three things: an email from the judge confirming the dismissal with prejudice, a photo from Carmen of a wall finally dry, and an acceptance letter for Malik, written in the kind of font that makes dreams look official. I printed all three. I taped them up with bright blue tape that made them look like flags. I sent a voice note to our people. We moved the floor another inch, I said, or bring your chairs, we're building a room. The city breathed. The wolves retreated to plan their next question. We sharpened our pencils. We practiced the lines that hold when the wind picks up. We set the table. We ate. We made coffee. We told a better story again. And somewhere, in a house where the drywall no longer flaked like snowfall, a boy slept through the night without coughing. That is why. Not the headlines, not the hearings, the boy breathing while the city remembers how. The invitation came folded like a secret and heavy like a key, cream paper, raised ink, a crest that pretended to be history and was really just money with good manners. Civic Futures Forum, it read, an evening of ideas with the city's decision makers. Black tie, no cameras, no press, the kind of room that loves sincerity only after it's been approved by a donor. Aaron held it by the corner like it might smudge. You going? I don't like rooms with rules about light, I said. That's why you should go. I looked at the date, Saturday, the night before Malik left for school. The night I had promised myself I'd spend eating cheap pizza with the line school crew, trading bad jokes and good advice. Bring them, Aaron said, reading my face. Just bring our people to the edge of their room even if the door won't open. I slipped the invitation into my notebook. We don't ask permission, I said. We bring our own light. The week moved with the hungry rhythm of a city that thinks time is a sport. Mornings at the community center, afternoons and drafts that kept changing shape until they finally told the truth. Evenings with my father on the phone, his questions soft and steady, his pride a blanket I didn't want but needed. The billboard changed again. New ad. Same lie. A life above it all. I took another photo because remembering matters when you want to forget. On Thursday, an email arrived from a producer with a smile that could sign checks. National show. Prime slot. We love what you're doing. Can you come on and debate a strategist about the ethics of your methods? Debate, like conscience, is a game show. I wrote back one line. We don't debate oxygen. I pressed send before courtesy could talk me out of it. The city's audit dashboard launched. It was ugly and glorious. Numbers in public, deadlines with real dates, filters anyone could use on a phone while waiting for a bus. Carmen sent a screenshot with a circle around her building. They came, she wrote. Staples. I kept working. I kept breathing. I kept the tape recorder on my desk with a fresh cassette inside, the red eye ready to listen. I took calls from people who wanted to tell their stories and people who wanted to bury them. I told the first group yes, with care. I told the second group no, with documentation. Malik showed up at the center in his new coat, the one that made him look like he had a train to catch and a future to greet. He hugged me with one arm like he was saving the other for tomorrow. I got the dorm assignment, he said. The room has a window? Congratulations, I said. Wow, windows change everything. I'm scared, he said, grinning like he'd learned fear was a signal and not a stop sign. Good, I said. Scared means you know what matters. He nodded like he'd found a switch and wasn't sure if he was allowed to flip it. I wrote something for the first night, he said, eyes bright. I don't want to sound like I'm begging the room to keep me. You're not, I said. You're bringing your room with you. He laughed, a real laugh, the kind that makes the air warmer. I'll text you if I forget who I am. You won't, I said, and text me anyway. Saturday came, wrapped in sky the color of a decision. I ironed a dress that felt like armor you could sit down in. Aaron wore black like a threat and a welcome. We took a car because the weather sulked. On the way, I recorded a voice note. Remember, you don't need their room to do your work, I said. But if you enter, leave the door open for someone who wouldn't be invited. The venue was an old museum-turned-event space, marble floors that echoed judgment, chandeliers that hoarded light, men in tuxes who wore their names like brands, women whose laughter sounded like a password, the coat check smelled like perfume and winter. We stepped into the main hall and the air changed, thinner and perfumed like wealth had a thermostat. Round tables, place cards, a stage with a podium draped in drapery expensive enough to be a resume. The host, a philanthropist with a haircut that hinted at boats, welcomed me with carefully casual warmth. "So glad you could join us," he said. "We're big fans of your passion." "Thank you," I said. "We're big fans of outcomes." He blinked like I'd turned down a compliment, and he wasn't sure if that was allowed. "You're seated at table 4, he said, "with some of our most engaged partners." Table 4 had a view of the stage and a view of the exit. Good, I like both. The centerpiece was a pile of white flowers pretending not to be a barrier. Place cards spelled names that had introduced themselves to microphones often. A deputy mayor, a consulting CEO, a tech founder who called himself a disruptor, as if the city needed more breaking and less building. The deputy mayor smiled with practiced humanity. "Your series," she said, "has certainly started conversations." "We aim for a repair," I said. "Conversations are a welcome side effect." The consultant lifted his glass. "To robust discourse," he said, like a toast could replace a policy. Erin bumped my foot under the table when I didn't raise my glass. I did, because she was right. Don't give them a smaller fight than the one you came for. The program started the way these programs always do. A video montage that replaced reality with 4-minute redemption arcs, a keynote that promised a partnership between innovation and compassion, and then charged admission. I watched the room watch itself. Self-satisfaction is a narcotic that smells like hand soap. At the first break, a woman in a red dress approached with the efficient grace of someone who knows where the cameras would be if there were cameras. "I run a foundation interested in narrative shift," she said, putting quotes around her intention like jewelry. "We're impressed. We'd love to discuss scale." "Scale of what?" I asked. "Impact," she said. "Reach." "Reach is not impact," I said. "Impact is a mother sleeping without fear because the system stopped lying." She nodded as if she agreed, and then changed the subject without moving it. "We think your work could benefit from a more bipartisan tone." "Truth doesn't caucus," I said. Her smile thinned. "We'll be in touch," she said, which is a statement that practices ghosting for sport. The host took the stage again and introduced a fireside chat without fire, between a former senator and a media entrepreneur who once sold an app and now sold optimism. They spoke in polished platitudes. They took questions only from names that wore suits. When the microphone reached our table, Erin tipped her chin at me. I stood. The room turned. The chandelier light hit my eyes and made me squint like I was angry before I was. "You have a dashboard," I said, voice steady. "You have reforms drafted and passed. You have a chance to build trust out of wood, not press releases. Why are you fundraising for more conversations when the city is asking for concrete?" A murmur, a shift of posture. The former senator smiled the smile of a man accustomed to controlling the temperature. "Change takes time," he said. "It takes coalition. It takes a decision," I said. "It takes verbs." The room exhaled. Somewhere a fork clinked against a plate like a bell calling the hour. The host slid in, congratulating my courage, changing the subject with the ease of a magician. The program moved on, but the air didn't forget. The chandelier light felt less smug. At the second break, the deputy mayor intercepted me by the coffee urns. "You're not wrong," she said, voice lower, "but you're making enemies you don't need." "I need fewer staples," I said. "The enemies come with the furniture." She almost smiled. "We're drafting an apology for how procurement was handled," she said. "Start with 'we did,'" I said. "End with 'we are paying.' Put a check in the middle." She studied me like I was a math problem with a clean solution and an expensive outcome. You make it sound simple. It isn't, I said. It's necessary. She squeezed my elbow with a familiarity I hadn't agreed to and walked away. Erin appeared at my shoulder. You're doing fine, she said. You didn't set anything on fire. I lit a match, I said. I left it on the table. From the corner of the room, music rose. A trio played standards soft enough to let donors feel generous. I scanned the tables. I saw men who built fortunes and women who managed them and younger versions of both learning to talk like the room expected. I saw a kid in a server's jacket carrying plates with the focus of a surgeon. His eyes met mine for a second. I tipped my head. He tipped his back, a tiny knot tied between strangers. The host clinked a spoon to glass. One last segment, he said, an open forum, short reflections on the city we want, and people stood and said kinds of sentences that sound good in a room taught to applaud them. Then a woman at the back raised her hand. Not a donor. Not on the program. A building superintendent by the look of the keys on her belt and the strength in her stance. I fix your pipes, she said. I keep your elevators from stranding your guests. I make your rooms possible. You talk about the city like it's an idea. It's not. It's a body. It needs lungs. It needs hands. It needs knees that bend without breaking. She pointed at the stage. If you want to help, pay on time. Hire union. Publish your vendor list. Stop hiding greed in the pockets of kindness. Silence. The good kind. The kind that turns a room from a mirror to a window. I felt something shift inside me, an old knot loosening. Not because I hadn't said these things, because she said them in a room that had spent an hour promising its own importance, and the ceiling didn't collapse. It creaked. It held. The host promised follow-up. The former senator called her brave. The music tried to erase the moment. It didn't. After the program, people milled, deals gestated, photo ops found angles. The deputy mayor introduced me to a housing commissioner whose handshake held the right amount of pressure and none of the wrong. We're piloting a tenant liaison program, she said. Your draft helped. We want line school to train the first cohort. Yes, I said, before my suspicion could remind me of all the meetings where good ideas went to drown. We'll bring Carmen and Zoe. Her eyes lit in the way of someone who knew names mattered. Deal, she said in point. No press release until the first check's clear. Hold us to that. We will, I said. On the way out, the philanthropist host caught me by the stairs that pretended to be a grand exit and were really just stone made into theater. You were a hit, he said. Controversy draws attention. We draw attention to the truth, I said. Controversy is a side effect, not a goal. He laughed like I was charming. We should do a salon, he said. Invite a few folks. Keep it intimate. Invite the superintendent, I said, and the kid with the plates. He glanced at the servers like he hadn't noticed they had faces. We'll be in touch, he said. He wouldn't. Outside, the night smelled like overheard conversations and the exhaust of expensive cars. Erin linked her arm in mine. You did it, she said. We did a piece, I said. The room will try to grow scar tissue by morning. Then we'll cut it carefully, she said, with standards. We walked to the curb. The violinist stood under a street lamp playing for people who didn't know how lucky they were to pass through a song. He nodded at me, and I felt the world briefly organize around something that didn't require a memo. At home, I hung the dress like it had earned its keep. I sat on the floor and pressed my back to the couch and let the adrenaline leave like a guest who knows when to say goodbye. My phone lit with messages. The superintendent's speech had slipped out on a guest's story. 1 million views in an hour. The caption read, "She said what they won't." I smiled until I didn't. Going viral is a weather pattern I don't trust. It makes people forget the work when the rain stops. I texted the superintendent a thank you and a question. Do you want the attention? She wrote back, I want toilets to flush and checks to clear. Attention is rent-free until it's not. Tell me when it starts charging. I slept badly and woke early. The forum's aftermath hit like a dozen small waves. The host's office contacted us about a partnership that looked like a press release wearing philanthropy. We declined. The deputy mayor's office sent a draft of the liaison bill with language I could live inside. We sent edits that replaced may with shall. The commissioner sent dates for training. We booked the room. Malik stopped by on his way to the bus. He wore his coat and his fear and his joy like a stacked outfit. He handed me a folded note. "Open it after I go," he said, the way men in movies say goodbye before the war. "Deal," I said. He hugged me tight. He smelled like soap and a new beginning. He pulled back and did the thing boys do when they don't want to cry. They crack a joke. If I get there and someone tells me my voice is too loud, I'll tell them it's calibrated for truth. "Choose verbs like allies," I said. He grinned. "Make pressure a choice." He left. I watched him walk down the block and turn toward a life with windows. I opened the note. 4 lines. "When the room is quiet, I'll speak. When the room is loud, I'll breathe. When the room is closed, I'll build. When the room is mine, I'll open it." I pressed the paper to my chest because rituals help us hold more than we can. The day grew teeth. A developer announced a public-private innovation center with a lobby big enough to swallow accountability. The councilman who survived the audit smiled in the photo like he'd learned the lesson and filed it under optics. I wrote a script that started with a diagram of a revolving door and ended with a budget footnote that moved money from maintenance to branding. We filmed with care. We let architects talk about light and shadows. We let custodians talk about floor drains and broken elevator buttons and the way new buildings forget old people. I wrote a line that felt like a hinge. A city is judged not by skylines, but by the quiet reliability of its bathrooms. Erin laughed out loud when she read it. "You're going to get hate mail from developers," she said. "Good," I said. "They'll learn where the lever is." The brand steward sent a message that surprised me in the way a door opening surprises you when you thought you'd locked it. "We're piloting a no donor veto clause," he wrote. "It'll cost us. It's the right cost." I forwarded it to our panel with a note. Weather. At Line School, Zoe taught a class on saying it plain. She wrote on the board, "Start with the verb." A kid in a hoodie who never made eye contact raised his hand and said, "I didn't know I was allowed." And the room exhaled in a way I'll hear when I'm old. That night, the superintendent invited me to her building. She wanted to show me the heater that sang right before it died. We walked halls that carried stories in their paint. She knocked on a door, and an elder opened it with a smile and a complaint about the way the mailroom never sorted right. We sat at a small table with a plastic cloth, and she poured tea that tasted like mint and memory. "I'm not special," the superintendent said. "I just stopped being polite to the wrong people." "That's a kind of special," I said. She shrugged like praise slid off her coat. "You going to the next forum?" "If they ask," I said. "They will," she said. "You made the room remember it had a spine." The heater sang. Then it stopped. Then it reset itself like a tired heart. We wrote the work order together. We put a staple on it with a Sharpie, thick and black. On my way home, my phone buzzed with a private number. The voice was the deputy mayor's, lower and less polished. "We cut the apology," she said. "We're releasing the checks. We're naming the harm. We're not using if or but." "Good," I said. "Send it to the superintendent first." A beat, then, "We will." I hung up and let myself smile. Not a victory grin. A small, stubborn joy. The size you can keep. I recorded a message for our people. "When the door opens, don't bow," I said. "Stand. Say the names of the ones who aren't in the room. Ask for verbs. If they don't have them, bring your own." The next morning, I woke to a city shaped by a dozen invisible choices, repairs scheduled, a bill introduced, a training plan drafted, a developer's pitch meeting postponed to address community concerns. My inbox had a note from the host full of adjectives that tried to pet me into cooperation. I sent back a sentence. "No salons without staff at the table." He didn't reply. The superintendent texted a photo of a check. The memo line said, "Apology," she wrote. "We'll see." We released the revolving door episode. It didn't trend. It embedded. A building inspector wrote to say he watched it in his truck and circled back to a site with a tape measure and a new posture. A janitor sent a video of an elevator finally stopping on every floor. The comments felt like bricks. We stacked them. A letter arrived with no return address. My father was the contractor, it began. He taught me you never apologize because apology is expensive. I'm learning he was wrong. Enclosed, a photocopy of a donation to the fact-checker fund and a note that said, "Not penance, participation." I taped it to the wall. Blue tape. Flag. Night fell like an answer I recognized. The fan turned the room into a soft engine. I sat with the tape recorder and pressed the button and spoke a sentence I wanted to remember when the weather turned. Revenge is a story about them. Repair is a story about us. The phone chimed. Malik. A voice note from a dorm with yellow light and bad acoustics. I read it, he said. They listened. I didn't lower my voice. A laugh, then quieter. Thank you for the window. I listened twice, 3 times. I let pride be as loud as it needed to be, and then I folded it carefully and put it where I keep my courage. A storm warning rolled across the bottom of the screen. High winds, power vulnerable. I lit a candle just in case. The violinist's music found the window. The city's sirens practiced their old song. Somewhere downtown, a donor drafted an email about civil discourse, and somewhere uptown, a mother turned on a heater that hummed and held. The invitation for the next forum arrived in my inbox with glitter in the subject line. I marked it unread. I wrote back later one sentence, "If the staff and tenants don't have seats, we don't need them." I brewed coffee. I sharpened pencils. I wrote the next script. It began with a door opening and ended with a table set. In between, it carried 1,000 small, durable choices, the kind that never make headlines and always make homes. I pressed record and spoke it like a promise. No edits, no music, just breath, just truth, just the sound of a city learning to say we and mean it. The storm didn't arrive like thunder. It slipped in through the seams, under doors, along windows, around the ribs. Rain wrote its own language on the glass. Wind rattled the frames. The city, dressed for weather, glanced at the sky and pretended it wasn't worried. I lit a candle before the grid could remember it was mortal. The tape recorder blinked its old red eye. I pressed my palm to the table. I felt the wood say, "Hold." The first siren started somewhere south and moved north like a rumor with proof. Then another. I checked my phone. Messages stacked like sandbags. The superintendent, basement flooding, pumps old, we're on it. Carmen. We moved Ms. Alvarez to the second floor. Sun's inhaler ready, we're good. The deputy mayor. Dispatch overwhelmed, send addresses, I'll route. Aaron. You at the center or home? Home, I typed, headed out. Take the flashlight we hate, she wrote. The one that makes everything look true. I grabbed the bad, flattering flashlight, the one that refuses to lie, and went. The hallway hummed. Neighbors looked like a chorus without a hymn. We moved anyway. Outside, the street had turned into a shallow river that pretended it was temporary. People leapt puddles. A man in a soaked hoodie guided an elderly woman with the patience of a saint and the mouth of a sailor. The deli guy handed out bread and bottled water like he'd trained for it. I cut north. The community center held like a spine. Volunteers taped plastic over windows. Kids stuffed towels under doors. We weren't heroes. We were hands. The superintendent arrived like a storm with a plan. Elevators off, she said. We're walking people down. If you can carry, carry. We moved. Bodies up, bodies down. Boxes of medicine and bags of memories. I lifted what I could and looked people in the eyes when I said, "We've got you." They believed me because we had receipts. In the stairwell, a little boy held a goldfish in a jar and said, "His name is Lightning." And I wanted to cry because that was the bravest name I'd heard all year. I told him it fit. He nodded like maybe he'd known that all along. We reached the lobby and met the river edge. Water crept in under the door like it knew it could. The superintendent grabbed a mop like a sword. It wasn't enough. Pumps choked. We rerouted extension cords like arteries. Carmen found me with a list of apartments and a question that had weight. If the power goes, who needs us first? I drew the map in my head: oxygen tanks, refrigerators with insulin, phones to call daughters who could calm shaking hands. We built the order out loud. We didn't argue. We prioritized breath. The deputy mayor texted again: sandbags en route, 20 minutes. Make it 10, I wrote back, knowing she couldn't. Sometimes pressure is the only language power reads. The brand steward of all people texted a screenshot of a delivery tracking number and a note: portable sump pumps heading to the center. Don't post this, just use them. I stared at it like a door I didn't think would open had swung on quiet hinges. I wrote back 2 words: they'll matter. Lightning, the kid, not the fish, watched the water inch forward and said, it's like the floor is breathing in, and I loved him more for naming it right. We made a line and passed sandbags when they came. We built a low wall that looked like doubt and acted like faith. The water respected it just enough. At dusk, the power flickered and surrendered. The hallway went honest. Candles turned faces into topography, worry valleys, resolve ridgelines. Somewhere, a violin threaded the air, stubborn and steady. The world stayed tilted. The song said, center yourself anyway. In the cafeteria, we pushed tables together and served soup that tasted like well-meaning. People sat close and told storm stories because weather demands witnesses. I turned on the tape recorder and placed it in the middle of the table. Say what you need, I said. Say what you know. A janitor named Harlan spoke about the time he slept on a school bleacher to keep pipes from freezing and nobody wrote him a thank you. A nurse talked about walking home in a blackout and feeling the city memorize her fear. A 4th grader explained with enviable clarity how grown-ups should plan better. We didn't make content. We made a room. Around midnight, the pumps did their stubborn miracle. The water retreated like a sore loser. We exhaled in small increments. People found corners to sleep in. The superintendent leaned against a vending machine and slid down until she met the floor. You good? I asked. I'm tired of being romanticized, she said. This is work. It's not a montage. I know, I said. The donors will write poems, will write invoices. She snorted a laugh that almost stood up. Make sure they pay them. I will. I walked the halls and checked doors. In one room, Ms. Alvarez slept, her son breathing without the metronome of panic. In another, Lightning the goldfish floated like a tiny miracle. I tapped the glass. He refused to be impressed. My phone buzzed. Malik. A photo from his dorm window. Rain on glass. A caption. I read to the floor. They clapped with their eyes. I wrote back, good, build the room. By dawn, the wind had chewed itself out. The city wore the tired face of a fighter between rounds. We cleaned. We called. We logged what broke and what held. We wrote a list titled, What We Won't Forget. We pinned it to the bulletin board with blue tape. The apology went live at noon. The deputy mayor had kept her word. No if, no but. They named harm. They named cost. The superintendent got the email before the press did. She texted me a screenshot and 3 words. We'll still see. Accountability requires rehearsal and a budget. That night, we recorded the episode the storm demanded. Not about heroics, about preparation, about how systems with good press and bad plumbing always break first where the poor live. I wrote sentences that felt like wrenches. I turned them until the threads caught. We love to applaud breathless rescues, the voiceover said. We love less to fund boring prevention. Breathless looks good in headlines. Boring saves lives. Choose boring. We cut in Harlan's voice. We cut in the 4th grader's plan. We cut out anything that turned pain into aesthetic. We hit publish with the kind of quiet that says, this matters whether you like it or not. The reaction wasn't a wave. It was a tide. Building managers wrote for checklists. Teachers printed the fourth graders' plan and taped it to staff room fridges. A city in another state took our standards and swapped names and numbers and made them their own. That's influence, when your work loses your face and keeps its spine. The company that sued us sent a letter. In light of changed circumstances, we withdraw. No apology. Just a door closing softly. I filed it under noise subtracted. My father watched the storm from a chair by the window, coffee in a mug that said "World's Okayest Dad," which always made him laugh like he'd gotten away with something. He called and said, "Proud of you, kid." He said, "Rest is not a rumor." He said, "Eat." I ate. The next forum invitation arrived with a new promise. Staff and tenants at the table. The guest list included the superintendent, the kid with the plates, Harlan, Carmen. Someone had listened, or someone had noticed the weather and decided to dress for it. Erin read the lineup and raised an eyebrow. "Miracles," she said, "and deadlines." "We'll go," I said. "We'll bring flashlights." At line school, we added a class called Boring Wins. We taught spreadsheets and call trees and how to keep a backup battery alive for a week. People came because they learned the hard way that romance doesn't keep the water out. They left with binders and a look that said, "I can do this." That look is influence's currency. It spends clean. The brand steward showed up with cash and no speeches. He sat in the back again and passed out extension cords and wrote down a phone number from a guy who could repair pumps cheap and well. He didn't pitch. He didn't smile for a camera. He stacked chairs. I let the surprise pass. People grow when you stop announcing their growth. The commissioner called. "The liaison program passed," she said, "and we need your training by Monday." We drafted a curriculum that read like a promise and a boundary. We added a clause. Liaisons can escalate to public dashboards without permission. She said yes. I marked it with blue tape in my head. The councilman who loved optics called a press conference. He said words like resilience and community and partnership. He did not say we starved maintenance to feed appearances. The reporter I trusted asked him why the pumps were old. He said the budget was complicated. She said, "Do the math out loud." He didn't. The video traveled anyway. The superintendent cornered him after and handed him a list labeled, "Pay these first." He took it like he'd never seen such a plain demand. He looked at me over her shoulder. I looked back with a face I'd learned to wear. Uninterested in your charm. Interested in your receipts. That night, the violinist's music was less stubborn, more celebratory. People threw $1, a nod, a sigh. I stood and listened until the melody threaded something in me I hadn't known was frayed. He finished and shrugged like he had only been breathing. I said, "You tune us." He said, "You keep time." News from Malik. He joined a tiny reading group in the dorm basement. They met on bad chairs with good intentions. He sent a voice note. They asked what strategic influence means. I said, "It means you build gravity. It means you make the right thing the easy thing. It means you choose verbs like allies." He laughed. "They wrote that on the whiteboard." I replayed it until the sound became a room. The next forum landed a week later. No chandeliers this time. A municipal auditorium with stubborn acoustics and fluorescent lights that forgot kindness. The host moved like a humbled man. The agenda published the names I'd asked for, the room filled with people who'd never been here and never been asked. We took our seats in folding chairs that squeaked their annoyance. The superintendent sat to my left, Harlan to my right. The kid with the plates wore his server jacket like armor and a grin like permission. Carmen had a stack of folders and a pen she trusted. The deputy mayor stood on stage and didn't perform. She spoke in verbs. "We did," she said. "We are, we will." The room didn't clap. It nodded. It checked its watch and asked when. She answered with dates. They asked me to speak at the end. I didn't want the last word. I took it like a tool, not a trophy. "I used to think revenge would fix the emptiness," I said. "I thought it would sew the seam and make the shirt fit. It doesn't. It rips new holes. Repair is slower, it is boring, it is expensive, it is worth every receipt. Tonight we set a table. Tomorrow we feed people. I looked at the superintendent. You first. She walked up and didn't thank anyone. She read the list of buildings with failing pumps. She read the dates their checklist would be delivered. She asked why, less than she asked who and when. That's how you get work done. You hunt for nouns and calendar invites. Harlan spoke next. He held up a wrench like a thesis. Fund preventative maintenance, he said. Stop making us emergency-proof a city you underpay. People clapped like they'd been given permission to clap for the truth. The kid with the plates spoke last. He said, pay on time, and the room laughed because the plainness hit like a hammer. Good. After the host, less glitter now, more gray, asked if we'd stay for a smaller meeting. Staff only, he said. We said yes. We sat at a table with coffee that tasted like sincerity. We drafted a schedule with names in the right columns. We wrote in permanent marker, no donor veto. The brand steward signed it like a man who'd wrestled his board into the present tense. On the way out, the deputy mayor handed me an envelope. No cameras, she said, just this. Inside, a copy of a purchase order for new pumps, stamped approved. I didn't cry. I wanted to. I tucked it under my arm like a baby and walked out into air that smelled like rain rehearsing and the city trying. I got home and found a package at my door. No return address. Inside, a flashlight, heavy and ugly and true. A note. For next time. A friend who used to look away. I kept it. I put it with the tape recorder and the blue tape and the stack of letters I read when the wolves rehearsed their questions. My father called and said he'd made stew. Enough for an army, he lied. I took the train and ate from a bowl that tasted like my childhood and my future, agreeing for 5 minutes to share a table. He told me the story of the time he turned down a promotion because it would have meant lying to people he respected. Money is loud, he said. Honor is quieter. It sleeps better. I kissed his cheek and took the leftovers, and on the way home I wrote a script that started with a pump and ended with a promise. We choose boring. We choose receipts. We choose tables that hold. We filmed the training for liaisons, Carmen at the whiteboard with a marker like a wand, Zoe teaching say it plain, Harlan showing how to hear a machine's complaint before it breaks into a scream. We published the manual. We translated it into 3 languages that the city kept forgetting it spoke. The comments were not fire emojis. They were, thank you, this saved my mother. They were, we taped this above the sink. They were, I called and they answered, and that was new. The councilman lost his re-election bid by a small, beautiful margin. The contractor took a vacation he hadn't earned and stayed gone. The brand steward wrote a letter to his donors about a new policy that made them uncomfortable. He mailed it anyway. The deputy mayor started answering texts with photos of receipts. The superintendent got a raise. Harlan got a union card that looked like armor. The kid with the plates started an apprenticeship and stopped apologizing for wanting a day off. Lightning the goldfish lived. Malik sent a video of a reading in a crowded basement. He stood under a bad light and spoke like he owned the room and owed it his best. He didn't lower his voice at the end of his sentences. He didn't ask for permission. He said, I brought my chair, and everyone else scooted over. I printed the photo of the pump purchase order and taped it to the wall next to the judge's ruling and Carmen's drywall and Malik's acceptance letter. A flag field of blue tape, a country made of receipts. I sat on the floor and turned on the fan and let it cut the calm into slices small enough to taste. The ghosts took their seats and asked their usual questions. Who are you if this fails? Who are you if it wins? Who are you when the room goes quiet again? I answered with the ritual. I set the table. I make coffee. I tell a better story. I pressed record. If you can hear this, I said into the red eye, it means the weather changed, or you did. It means you learned that revenge is thin gruel. It means you realize that influence is not getting your way. It's making the right way the easiest road to walk. It's gravity. It's boring. It's receipts. It's a kid breathing all night. It's a pump that works before the sirens start. It's a city that says we and fixes the leak before blaming the rain. I stopped. I listened to my own breath. It sounded like a room full of people who weren't asking for permission anymore. The next morning, the luxury billboard changed one more time. New slogan. Same lie. A life above it all. Someone had spray painted beneath it in handwriting that looked tired and correct. No one lives above anything. The city would try to paint over it. We would take a photo first, we would keep the receipt. I walked to the water and watched the river keep its promise. Tide out. Tide in. Gravity doing its invisible work. I felt the relief of a job that never ends and still lets you sleep. I thought of every face, every hand, every verb. I thought of the table set in a room nobody used to enter without a key someone else owned. We own it now. Not to lock it, to leave it open. I went home. I made coffee. I sharpened pencils. I wrote the next story. It started with a light switch and ended with a door that wouldn't stay closed. In the middle, it held 1,000 small miracles no one can monetize and none of us can live without. I hit record. I spoke it clean. No music, no edits, just breath, just truth. Just the sound of us choosing the long, boring, beautiful work of repair over the short satisfaction of a wound. The fan hummed. The city breathed. The wolves found new questions. We practiced our answers. We stacked chairs. We paid invoices. We asked for verbs. We chose allies. We placed pressure where it belonged. And somewhere, in a building that had flood once and didn't tonight, a heater hummed and held. A boy slept. A mother did not wake to check his chest. A goldfish floated, unimpressed, in a jar that had seen a storm and kept going. That is the point. Not the forum, not the clip, not the applause, the work,